I will keep my comments very short because we have our group of presenters from Nonviolent Peaceforce has a lot that they would like to talk about in the next hour. Marna Anderson is the director of the USA branch of Nonviolent Peaceforce and has been involved in the work of Nonviolent Peaceforce for, I think, many decades. Manu Lewis is a program specialist at Nonviolent Peaceforce and is part of what is now, although the organization started in the US, this is now the US branch, and engaged also long-time engagement as a community activist here in Minneapolis. And Paige McLain is a recent graduate of the Humphrey School and College of Liberal Arts Master of Human Rights program. They're going to talk about the work of the Nonviolent Peaceforce and the deep thinking that I have been so impressed with that Nonviolent Peaceforce undertakes to really think about how you can act as a person and an organization to counter violence with nonviolence, to support peace without arms. And the really novel concept that I think they pioneered, the idea of unarmed civilian peace forces that intervene in areas of conflict. And we, as I said in one of our earlier panels, we did not plan to have this symposium on the day that Derek Chauvin would be sentenced. But I know that Nonviolent Peaceforce had a representation today in town, is that correct? Or we're planning to, around the potential for events that could occur. And so Nonviolent Peaceforce continues to think through what it means to act in a nonviolent way in the face of conflict. So I would like to turn it over to Marna to get started. We're going to hear about their work, about the way in which they have looked at bringing that work back home to Minnesota, and also the way in which they think through how to think about their work to meet the challenges of conflict in our world today. Marna, I will turn over the mic to you, and Paige, I understand that you will be sharing slides, so you can go ahead and do that.
Great. Well, thank you for the warm welcome and for inviting Nonviolent Peaceforce to be part of this conference. We're really happy to be here and really excited to talk with you all and really hopefully have time at the end to have a conversation with you about the work that we've been doing locally as well as globally. I really think that a nonviolent response to violent conflict is an idea whose time has come. And it really needs an idea that needs to be taken seriously, discussed and acted upon. So we're going to be going through and explaining. We had a poll that was going to come up. I don't know if that's ready yet. I will go ahead and go to the next slide, and maybe at the next time do the agenda. So we're going to talk. I just want to walk you through what we're going to do in the next hour. I want to describe what unarmed civilian protection is. It's not a term that we use. It's not a term that you're going to see in the funding categories, but it is a field that's growing, that Paige will address that aspect of it. I want to give you some examples of the impact on people that are most impacted by violent conflict. Paige will be addressing really more specifically how to expand the field of unarmed civilian protection. And you will be discussing what we're doing here locally. And then finally, we'd like to have a conversation with you about how you can be involved in our work. Okay, so we know the need is great. Every 2 seconds, a person is forced to flee their home because of violence, and over 68 million people have been forcibly displaced because of conflict. At least 243 people, including more than 100 women and children, were killed in Gaza just a few weeks ago. And in the DR Congo, where conflict has plagued that country, For 2 decades, 30,000 children have been displaced, and the forced return has resulted in humanitarian crisis for approximately 12.8 million people. Civilians are essentially cannon fodder in these conflicts. They tear families apart, displace entire villages, and make daily life impossible. Our #1 focus and energy at Nonviolent Peaceforce is to have presence with the people most directly affected by violence, those who are the most vulnerable, those who have the smallest voice, and who do everything we do everything we can to help them be safer, while the higher level peacemaking decisions might be being made. Oh, there. No, but we have to go back. No, we have to go back one.
Marna, the poll is ready if you're ready.
Okay, let's do the poll. So we want to before we get started and dig in, we want to get an idea from you of what do you think it's possible to have protection in communities without weapons? We'd like you just to yes, no, or maybe. So are we having any of the responses?
Yes.
So how's this group?
I can in the poll. Let's see. Okay, people are just starting to vote. Here we go. Can you see the poll on the screen?
I can't. No, I think only the host can see it.
Well,
Patricia, it ran once and then it closed, so everybody should vote again. If you voted the first time, vote again.
okay, is it showing again? Because I see it.
Yes.
Yeah, because I see it on my screen and I voted once. If I vote again, I'm afraid I will vote twice.
But the first one won't
I
count.
will increase the yes.
Well, we can,
Okay.
I don't know, maybe this is gonna work.
18 are voting. Hang on.
Okay.
Just give it another
Okay.
couple of seconds. Yeah. Yeah. So Manu, you can see it. Good. I think it might be about done. Okay, let's just end the poll
How many yeses?
and we're going to share the results, and let's see if that is the result showing, Craig?
Yes.
Yeah, we have 72% that said yes and 28% that said maybe. And so I'm really happy to see that. So we don't have to convince you of what we're trying to do, but I'm hoping that you'll see the impact of how this works, and also really start to kind of spark your imagination to how you can take these the tools that we use around the globe of unarmed civilian protection and use them in your local communities. So we had talked about the extent of the need globally, and I just want to talk about it locally a little bit. Just really the daily impact of too many guns on our streets, the violence that we have seen so much against communities of color at the hands of police and specific communities targeted by hate groups. We're really seeing that recently with against the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And just the default to the use of violence to resolve conflict that permeates American culture. I think one of the most heartbreaking evidence of this is the recent shootings in North Minneapolis and the 3 young children that were fatally shot. And again, it speaks to civilians being caught in crossfire of violent conflict and essentially being cannon fodder. I don't know. So here we go. This is the right one. Okay. So when we looked at whether or not we wanted to, we've been asked for a long time to come to the United States, that the violence that we're experiencing in the United States warranted a presence of unarmed civilian peacekeepers or protectors. So the early warning indicators that we look at when we determine where we want to do an assessment are the things that are listed here: extreme polarization, an attitude of us versus them, a rise in hate speech, no social consensus on what facts are, increased police brutality or brutality by security forces, increased domestic terrorism, unequal access to basic goods and services, increased number of guns and weapons in the populations, violence starting to mix with politics, and no commitment to a peaceful transfer of power. So we all can think back to September and October and August, and this is what we were looking at. And we actually saw evidence of the violence on January 6th when people stormed the Capitol. So this was really an indication to us that it was time to have a group like have us and other groups that are committed to nonviolence to present a new way forward for safety and security, and to think differently about how we could resolve these conflicts in our country. So we'd like you just to take think about what safety looks like in your community. Just write up a word or two or an idea in the chat, and we'd like to just look at those and see how you're thinking about community safety. What does safety mean to you in your community? Mutual trust. Freedom. What are some other thoughts people have? Being neighbors, not just in neighborhoods. Belief in a shared humanity. I like that. Anyone with any identity can go about their days without fear. Restorative justice. It should be restorative justice, but it's driven by the police. Safety means my loved ones do not worry about themselves any day or night. Recognizing each other's dignity. Engagement of officers with kids, 24/7 comfort. So you can see from these responses that when we talk about safety, we talk about it much more holistically than just our physical safety. Feeling comfortable for kids to be able to be outside in their neighborhoods. Friends of color not being afraid when they leave their homes. So we really think about it much more holistically. What's psychological, emotional safety, as well as physical safety. And that's the sort of safety that we think that we want to talk about today. And that's really, that's really the paradigm shift, right? So we have a new story to tell about what actually keeps us safe. And we know that safety doesn't come from outward, that really it comes within our communities. We're the ones that can create neighborhoods where children can go out and play safely, right? We're the ones that can help make sure that our neighbors are actually able to walk around and not feel in fear. And that we're the ones that can protect our neighbors who are more vulnerable groups, who are from communities that are attacked for the color of their skin. So Nonviolent Peaceforce really works in the space of civilian to civilian, and civilian-led safety. And a lot of that is about civil resistance. So civil resistance, a political action that relies on the use of nonviolent resistance by civil groups. It's a means of defense against it. So we're looking at civil defense, kind of a being able to protect yourself from attack. And we work in the space of civilian protection. All of this makes up the nonviolent action. And so we work in that civilian protection space. I'm not sure if many of you know of the work of Erica Chenoweth. She is an academic and she wrote the book, Why Civil Resistance Works. I really would encourage you to pick up her book or at least watch her TED Talk. She attended a conference on nonviolence and she was a vocal skeptic of the possibility of nonviolence really making a difference in people's lives. And so someone challenged her to study the outcomes of violent and nonviolent campaigns. And so she did. And she completed the most extensive study comparing campaigns that took place between 1900 and 2006. And she found that nonviolent action was more than twice as effective as the violent counterparts in achieving their stated goals to create social change or regime change. And her findings also suggested that it takes just 3.5% of a population to participate in sustained resistance efforts to be successful in their goal. I find that incredibly heartening. And one thing she also found was that nonviolent movements actually lead to more democratic institutions that, that sustain the peace for up to at least 15 years. So the idea of nonviolence is universal. It rings true wherever we go and wherever we work. There are people that are working and using nonviolence to enhance their communities. But we default to violence because it's easy and it's because we're taught. In her TED Talk, Chenoweth suggests that instead of starting our history books with stories of battles with just a few pages in the back dedicated to people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, imagine how differently we would think about nonviolence if our book started with examples of times when social movements were successful, when a group of people challenged the status quo and they won. We're oriented to believe that peace through nonviolence is impossible, but we need to remember that amazing things are happening on the fringes of the impossible. And we have seen that so much in our work in some of the most violent conflicts around the world. So what is nonviolent peace? What is unarmed civilian protection? So we talk about this the protection tree, right? And so at the roots of unarmed civilian protection are our principles of nonviolence, primacy of the local actors, civilian to civilian protection, independence, and nonpartisanship. Nonviolent Peace Force doesn't take sides in particular conflicts. We stand on the side of human rights and humanitarian law, but our principles are really what ground our practice. And then if you look at the trunk of the tree, it's really protecting civilians, interrupting cycles of violence, enhancing nonviolent responses to conflict. This is really engaging local communities and finding out what their strengths that already exist. And then we have all of our methods that we use. And I'm going to talk a little bit, a few examples today, and you will as well, of how some of the methods that we use locally. But for sure, protective accompaniment, having a protective presence, controlling rumors. I would say that's a big one that we do, particularly in South Sudan. If there's a situation of two clans or two villages, if there's rumors that get started that one clan is going to attack the other, and sometimes it's not true, and we work to help break down those rumors. And then this is all watered and nourished through relationships. Our work is rooted in relationships and building relationships with local people. So what does it look like on the ground? We have right now about 300 people working around the world who are trained professionals. They are not volunteers. They work full-time in the communities where they work. We live and work where we live where we work. Our teams are made up of nationals and internationals and men and women. And over half of our folks are from the country where we're working. We're deeply immersed in community, and it is much more cost effective than armed troops. So I want to just give you 3 quick examples, and then I'm going to turn it over to Paige. Women's protection teams. This is a group of women in South Sudan. We have trained about 2,500 women who work in their local communities in their in protection teams. And this was an initiative of a group of women who said, we need to be trained. We're the ones that know what's going on in our community. We're always here while the men are off fighting or off working. And so they intervene sometimes in cases of domestic violence. If they get a sense that an armed group is coming to kidnap some of their children to be recruited into their group, they will go and they'll confront the armed officers and tell them that you need to stay out of our community, you need to stay away from our sons. And they will, when young boys are captured and forced into some of these armed groups, they will go and get them back. And they are, I will say, pretty fearless and have done some amazing things you can read about on our website as well. This man in front is Tiago. He's from Brazil. And this is also an image from South Sudan. And he is leading a group of women from the protection site to get water and firewood. They have to leave every day to find a supplemental food for their families and water. And they were routinely raped by soldiers and by armed groups when they would leave. And they asked for protection. And ironically, this is a site that is protected by the UN, which is armed. But the UN was not allowed to provide protective accompaniment to women. They're not allowed to leave the site. But our protection officers do leave, and it's not just a simple walk. They really look to find out what the dangers are, assess the risk beforehand, and then accompany women as they leave to get, then sometimes they're walking 15 kilometers to get water and firewood. And when we've done that, there's been nobody raped. We've done a couple thousand accompaniments over the last few years. And finally, I just want to, this is from the UN. We also do advocacy of the United Nations to advocate for unarmed civilian protection. And this was an external evaluation of Nonviolent Peaceforce's project from the Philippines. Armed actors on both sides confirm that the presence of third party watching over them, including Nonviolent Peaceforce, serves to temper their behavior. So that's that relationship instead of weapons, and the influence of that makes a huge difference. I'm going to turn it over now to Paige.
Great, thank you, Marna. Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me. I want to talk a little bit about, in addition to the work that Nonviolent Peaceforce is doing in communities around the globe, the work that Nonviolent Peaceforce is doing actually to build on the body of knowledge on unarmed civilian protection. Expanding the field is not just more organizations and more people doing UCP, but it's about changing the mindsets and policies that govern security structures. The goal of this work is to have a broader audience recognize UCP as a legitimate and successful protection method. And part of the work that NP is doing is actually with the Good Practices Project, which is focused on identifying and enhancing good practices in the field of UCP. This work actually started in 2016 when Nonviolent Peaceforce published a book on UCP case studies from around the globe. Then between 2017 and 2021, Nonviolent Peaceforce hosted 6 regional workshops to understand how practitioners in their respective regions conducted UCP. And as an outcome of these workshops, the UCP Good Practices report was completed this year. And that report, I actually authored that with 2 other collaborators through the U of M Human Rights Lab and the support of Nonviolent Peaceforce. And we focused specifically on the challenges practitioners face when implementing UCP practices. So building on the book, the regional workshops, and the report, Nonviolent Peaceforce is planning to host their first ever UCP Global Conference on Good Practices next year. Today, though, I'm here because I would like to share some of the findings from the UCP Good Practices report with you. So the report focused on the 6 practices that you can see on the screen. These were identified through the regional workshops that were completed at the time of the research phase of the project, of which 5 of the 6 were completed. And of these 6 practices, I actually want to focus on 3 specifically today: primacy of local actors, relationship building, and nonpartisanship, which you heard Marna speaking about earlier. So with these, I want to highlight the challenges experienced by UCP practitioners while utilizing the different good practices to create safer spaces for civilians from a global perspective, before we discuss more on the work that Nonviolent Peaceforce is doing today in the Twin Cities. So I'll start with the primacy of local actors. Through the research for the report, it became very clear that the primacy of local actors is really made up of 2 parts. The first is around the inclusion of local actors. That means that UCP practitioners incorporate local actors into their work, incorporate them into developing protection plans. Local actors have extensive knowledge about the area, culture, people. They have experienced the violence, and that experience is brought into the plans as they're co-created between the UCP organization and local actors. Practitioners also do this because it is a way to develop deeper relationships with local actors. Marta referenced this, but I'll say it again, relationships are a vital component of UCP, which I'm going to discuss a little bit more later too. And one of the benefits too of incorporating local actors is also enhancing local actors' capacity to self-protect. So that's the first piece of primacy of local actors. But the second part that became clear through the research for the report was the focus on those most oppressed by violence, and specifically thinking about that in terms of human rights abuses. This focus on those most oppressed reminds practitioners that we're incorporating all people into the peace process, right? So in addition to helping focus the work, it's also to help incorporate all into the peacekeeping process. So I want to actually share a quote with from one of the practitioners I interviewed as they talked about their process to get to the most oppressed by violence. This practitioner said, "I found that I actually don't start off working with the most vulnerable. I found that I start working with the ones that I can, because the fact of the matter is, especially when you walk into such vulnerable communities, almost everyone needs help. The voices of what we would term as not necessarily very vulnerable, they also need to be heard. So my aim is to go to the most vulnerable, but I'll work with the ones whose voices are not necessarily the most vulnerable and work towards that." So I think this highlights some of the challenges, but also how it helps to focus the work for unarmed civilian protection practitioners. So who are local actors? That's a pretty general term. Through the research, again, one of the things we tried to do is actually categorize local actors. And what we found was 4 different groups, really. Local or national NGOs or CSOs, which is typically who a UCP organization will partner with as they enter a new area. Local communities, human rights defenders, and then those most oppressed by the violence. But a couple things I want to note about these categories. First off, individual actors may belong to more than one group. So, maybe the most oppressed live within that local community you're working with. And additionally, just because actors are within the same group does not necessarily mean that they always have the same needs and wants. So I want to highlight some of the challenges of incorporating local actors into UCP work. While it's essential to creating successful protection plans, doesn't mean it's easy. So I'll just highlight one challenge for each of these groups. First, for those local or national NGOs and CSOs, sometimes practitioners highlighted that there are actually different goals, conflicting goals between the UCP organization and the local organization, which could be challenging. With local communities, the challenge that stood out the most was actually dealing with human rights abuses within a community. And for human rights defenders, some practitioners that did this type of work found that occasionally human rights defenders might be associated with illegal activities or a political party, which hurts that UCP organization's image, which can be important for creating relationships with others. And then lastly, with the most oppressed by violence, identifying these individuals and getting access to them was the thing that practitioners highlighted as the most challenging. So let's talk a little bit more about relationship building. In order to practice the primacy of local actors, you need deep and lasting relationships with these actors. And UCP relies on human networks. That's their tool. Many tools, but their strongest tool is relationships. And UCP practitioners spend a lot of time developing these relationships. UCP organizations will work to build a web of relationships between individual practitioners and local actors, but also across UCP teams. And they do this by nurturing both old and new relationships. One practitioner actually described their experience developing a new relationship by utilizing the relationship of their team member with an existing community member. He said, "When we first meet a new partner, they don't know me, They don't trust me. They don't believe in me. And for all they know, I'm going to make them even more vulnerable than they already are. But they know my colleague who's probably speaking their language, and they trust them and they want to help their colleague, who then introduces me with love and trust and acceptance. And that practitioner described that as how she was able to develop relationships with the community. But for UCP organizations, relationship building goes beyond just local actors. It also is with other actors and groups as well. Building is vital with all parties involved in the conflict. So you can see the local actors here that we just talked about, but also some of those other actors, state and local officials, the military and police, sometimes even unsanctioned armed groups, and international organizations. And these relationships are utilized to improve protection plans. So for one example, one practitioner told me a story about their efforts to actually develop a relationship with a military general in a specific area that UCP organization was working in. And one day the UCP team was accompanying a few local actors, and they actually were stopped at a military blockade and they could not get through. And so what the UCP practitioner actually did is he was able to call that general because of the relationship that he had made. And with that call was able to get through the blockade and continue their work without any violence and without the threat of violence. So you can see there how that relationship with other actors is also beneficial. Okay, so last one I want to talk about is nonpartisanship, and Marna touched on this a little bit. Relationship building, though, is also kind of related to this. So different UCP organizations may actually approach their work and relationship building a little bit differently based on their kind of philosophy and methodology for UCP. And one very common approach is nonpartisanship. Another is more of a solidarity approach. I want to talk about nonpartisanship first. So some UCP organizations adhere to nonpartisanship, which means that nonpartisan to local politics. The UCP organization does not engage in local politics or pick sides, right? That's the biggest piece of not picking sides so that you can create relationships with multiple people. However, they're still partisan to human rights abuses and injustice. Other UCP organizations prefer more of a solidarity approach to their work, where the organization states that they stand firmly with those that are experiencing violence, and in that do not attempt to develop broad and deep relationships with those engaging in the violence. There are pros and cons to both of these approaches. So nonpartisanship, the benefit is you really do have the ability to develop more relationships, which can make stronger protection plans, like we saw with the example of the military general in the blockade. But with solidarity, one of the benefits, some of the practitioners in these organizations really did say that it was easier for them to develop stronger relationships with local actors. So to talk about nonpartisanship again, I'll just jump back over to kind of some of that challenge, right? So one practitioner actually described this challenge really well. He said, as he was working in a community, he would go to speak to the local military commander, but as soon as he was done, he needed to immediately go back to the community, explain what he was doing, or risk his relationship with that community. So practitioners described there's a lot of work that comes with this nonpartisanship approach. However, on the solidarity side of the house, one of the challenges is it really does reduce the opportunity to develop relationships with other actors, which can directly impact those protection plans. So with that, Nonviolent Peaceforce adheres to a nonpartisanship approach in their work, and they've benefited many times from this approach. So with that, I actually want to turn it back over to Nonviolent Peaceforce to discuss their work further in the Twin Cities, utilizing these practices.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Manu Lewis, and as the program specialist here in the U.S., we see that there to establish Nonviolent Peace Force, or even to introduce the ideology to the community. And I was just thinking back on some of the answers to some of the questions, and one of the questions is a shared humanity, and that really stood out. So in the slide that's being shown now, it says shared humanity, yes. And I'm trying to see coalition work is not work done in your home. Coalition work has to be done in the streets. And it's some of the most dangerous work you can do. And you shouldn't look for comfort. So with that, one of the challenges and one of the greatest challenges that we have in actually establishing the work within the communities or within the twin cities is building those relationships with a lot of the key actors and community members. And in that approach, I think one of the best approaches in listening is coming from a place of that, like you say, that shared value, that shared human value that we can kind of touch on as a neutral point to start building those relationships. So as Marna spoke about, building relationships or building strong relationships is the most vital part to mitigating violence, gun violence, and actually getting individuals in the community to participate. Those relationships really are built in truth and based on a commonality. So, and I just want to come back and talk about some of the work that we have been doing here in Minneapolis with when I was introduced to Nonviolent Peaceforce, it was through a training that was offered to the school safety specialists last year, in which really focused on how to engage the students and the staff and parents and like the community surrounding around how do we listen to the students, listen to the teachers, and listen to the community to develop nonviolent methodologies or unarmed civilian protection methods, and actually reflect those as a value, because we know that safety is a core value. So how do we start that conversation with the students and also with the staff? How do we facilitate how that looks based on the methodologies in which we have to not only share those tools, but also support the participants in making it sustainable.
Page to advance the slide.
So, and I was trying to slide through the slide. So when we talk about rethinking security, it's resistance plus constructive program. So when we're talking about, and I think we alluded to it at the start, and even the term rethinking security, it pushes towards reimagining not only what security has been, but how do we, as you know, the common individuals, the common community members, how do we also get engaged with receiving those tools or get engaged with creating safety models. So our first initiative that I got involved with was with this school safety specialist, which transformed over into really being focused on, and there was a program called Emerge, which is a nonprofit organization that actually works with some young men who have once been, let's say, fully engaged in the street life, right? So the work that they have been doing with these young men has been around thought process and thinking for change, and actually how they see themselves, how they see their families, how they engage their families, and also how they engage in the community. And from that point, we came in with the unarmed civilian protection methodologies, and in doing that ongoing training, really supported that lifestyle or that mindset change with giving them, providing them tools that allow them alternative methods to dealing with conflict, basically. So from that point, them receiving the tools that they needed, there was also a school in the close proximity in which a relationship was built with the organization, the young men and the school on what the program is North 4, and actually what they were trying to do within the community around safety measures, and ultimately formed a relationship which turned into a contract which these young men, and I think they have a contract with 5 other men right now, where the young men actually utilize the methods of protective presence and risk assessment, early warning, early responses in protecting the young people that attend that school.
Can I ask her to advance the slide?
Can you advance the slide,
Oh, there.
please? I'm having a hard time on this end. So and thank you, and we're talking about negative peace, which is the absence of violence or fear of violence, and a positive peace, which is an attitude, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. So even in the illustration working with the North 4 and Ascension School, a concept has been put into motion that some of these same young men who the community has seen at one point in time were not necessarily acting in the most meaningful manner or the wholesome manner, have changed their mindsets and in their application of how they show up in the community, which does a great imagery for the young people that they're protecting, because in their minds, they know that the young men and women that they're protecting actually have a different concept of one young Black man and what they're doing in the community, 2, that their life is important enough to be protected, and that 3, that they're part of the community and they want to see these young people grow old. So when we talk about rethinking security, it's more than just policing without guns, but it is a mindset in which, being centered and showing up with a peaceful energy and a mindset to resolve issues without resulting to conflict is the key of the day. So can we kind of go to the next slide, please? So
Go back one.
Go back one, because what I really want to show, and this is one of the protective presence that these young men, which formulated a community safety team, their presence was very much felt in one of the occupations of downtown. But what it actually contributed to is changing the concept of who is violent, who can be a part of the safety teams, and why. These young men, and I'm very kind of get whelped up anytime I start talking about them, because working with them over the last couple of years, I understand how difficult it can be to come from a mindset where you can't quite imagine what safety is or what safety looks like. And that's, based on, your social economic conditions, but for them to embody what it means to not only think about safety, but actually participating in keeping other people's safety. So this particular picture about the protective presence was one presence that we had downtown Minneapolis. So I want to go to the next slide, please. So this is where it gets interactive. I think for all of those who can actually see this picture, right? This was a part of the school safety specialist training, which I participated in last year. And this is one of the visual examples that we use sometimes when we see what might be a conflict, also taking into account other individuals, and just looking at the picture. And I think we're right here where the mouse is. You see the brother with his hands in his pocket. He's just observing. You have a couple individuals with their phones out looking at the conflict. And oftentimes in our communities, when we see a conflict or something going on, people based on their comfortability take certain stands. Some people pull out their phones, they want to record it. Some people may say something as being a distractive, but of a certainty, everyone has a role to play. And we just know that when individuals actually go through the training, get the UCP training, embody the unarmed civilian protection methodologies, that we become more intentional in how we show up, more intentional in our presence, and even more intentional in, looking at the conditions of humanity, or in this situation, the conditions of the human being who may be their safety at risk. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So with this visual, I think that this is the interactive part where, maybe some people can go in the chat and kind of tell me what you see, or tell me what's visual to you. Because I think a lot of times when we're talking about creating safety and showing up with a centeredness of peace, sometimes it's kind of, looking at the picture, and I just cringe every time I see it, because I see what I see, and I don't want to take away what other people see. She seems to be free of fear while they seem terrified. Yep, that's a good observation, right? Disturbed, worrying her. Wow. Okay, so in a lot of instances, we know that it is a mindset. Yep, she's quietly holding her own space, right? It starts out creating peaceful and safe environments and safe community does start out with a mindset. It starts out with a disposition. It starts out with how we show up in spaces and being intentional, right? And and I seen it, that last comment that refusal, yep. So, and actually in this picture, I see a young lady, a young individual, an individual that has a confident posture. Her chin is up. She looks centered. She looks like she knows why she's there. She's expecting. But what she's also doing is showing that in the presence of armed forces and armed individuals, that that it is the peaceful mindsets that actually control the situation in this picture, and in this picture alone. These individuals with the boots and the guns and the shields, they don't seem too confident about approaching this young individual with her dress floating in the wind, right? And oftentimes we understand that the presence of guns, armed actors, don't actually bring about peaceful solutions or resolutions. So that's why it is very important when we're talking about rethinking safety and security, to understand that it does start with a mindset, and the capacity that we have. Her energy field is clearly powerful indeed. And thank you for sharing that, Craig. So we're right at the time of, do we have a next slide, perhaps? Great. So everything that is needed to build true safety and belonging already exists in each of us. I believe that this is a true statement. Matter of fact, based on that statement, that is my back turn in the training that we participated in last year that got me very much interested. And this example was a clear example regardless of age, color, or gender, that we are all connected in our humanity and that we can all play a role in keeping each other safe. So I want to open up for any questions and answers that anyone may have at this time.
I noticed, this is Mary, and I noticed that Gary had a question in there. Gary, would you like to jump in and ask that question? Or shall I? So for those of you who haven't been here, Gary Smaby is friend of the Humphrey School and a lifelong peace builder who helped make this conference possible. So Gary, are you able?
I'm available. So my question had to do with a group that was formed, I recall, in the late 70s, perhaps, in New York City called the Guardian Angels, and they were controversial at the time. I don't know if that organization is still around, but I was curious as to how that model, if you're familiar with it, fits into the paradigm you're discussing.
Well, thank you for asking that, Gary. I think, you aging me right now when you talk about the 70s. So I think I was a little bitty dude at that time. But in just knowing and growing up and understanding, I think that in my understanding that safety is something that you facilitate. It must be facilitated. It cannot be enforced. We cannot force safety or for people to be safe. I think the relationship building part is the integral part of building those relationships. So it is more about, I think it's more about reflecting that core value and facilitating those conversations as opposed to enforcing peace and safety, if that makes any sense.
I have to admit, I don't have a lot of information about the Guardian Angels, but I do think just from a little bit I know, one of the differences really is kind of that being embedded and working in local communities and really building those relationships. We typically don't go where we're not invited and where people, so people want to come in and have this approach in their community. So I don't know if the Guardian Angels, my understanding was they really were focused on crime prevention. And we're really focused on creating, increasing safety and certainly preventing violence, not so much focused on crime, which I think was, it started, Guardian Angels, I believe started, as you said, in the 70s in New York City. It would make sense that it'd be focused on crime prevention. So we're a little different than that, or quite a bit different than that, I think, in that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. There's some, but I will say that Guardian Angels and American Indian Movement, and there's the Cure Violence. We worked with them in Syria. They have the violence interrupters now. There's now about 50. A lot of those groups are definitely AIM and Guardian Angels led the way. Right, paved the way for some of this for this movement to be continuing. There's now about 50 organizations around the world doing some form of unarmed civilian protection. So it is a field that's growing for sure.
I'm going to ask a question, then I see also that Patricia has one. So we had a couple of people, but Steiner Bryn, who just jumped off because it's midnight in Norway, and he and one of his colleagues from Macedonia talked about dialogue and how they their organization and some of the other organizations that we've talked to over the last 2 days see their role as fostering long-term difficult dialogue among communities in conflict. And I was wondering if Nonviolent Peaceforce sees itself in that role, or is that, I know each organization sort of defines their own special role. Does Nonviolent Peaceforce get involved in fostering those kinds of long-term conflict resolution dialogues?
Yes, when we're invited to do so. And so, an example that I can think of from recent years was being invited to participate and to host a dialogue amongst religious leaders in Iraq, trying to solve the problem, what they perceive to be as the problem of people in the displacement camps. And so that was, as you can imagine, leaders from a lot of different faiths sitting around the table together, had a lot of different approaches, and Nonviolent Peaceforce was invited to help host that conversation. Also in displacement camps, for example, we'll work with humanitarian aid organizations. There's a camp management and community leaders to kind of resolve some issues that they might have. It can be something like, not enough wash stations, and so women feeling very exposed when they go to bathe, knowing that other people can see them, and kind of helping to come up with a solution to something like that, that really increases, again, that sense of safety. So it can take a lot of different forms, but yeah, we do get involved in those sorts of conversations and resolutions.
Great. Patricia, you had a question there that you'd like to ask?
It's just bringing the threads forward. So Marna and Manu and Paige, we started yesterday at 8 a.m. with the question of this, in this unprecedented time, but not, there have been pandemics before, but there's such a confluence of so many things right now. The pandemic, George Floyd, reckoning happening. There's challenges, but there's so much opportunity. Every presenter has spoken about the opportunity. And I'm just wondering now, what's your biggest hope? Or I don't know if hope's the right word. What do you see that's really possible now?
For me? What I see possible now is human beings or humanity rising, right? Rising to the surface. What I see is the honest, caring concern that, people have for each other. I see that being brought to the forefront in this community building work, or the opportunities that we have now to really listen and speak to other individuals who may not look like us or may not live up under the conditions that we live, to understand what it looks like, or listen what it feels like to be safe, or how can we help keep each other safe. I think right now is a very pregnant time to have those conversations in truth, and really address and deal with our own biases and how we play a part in not listening, or being more attentive in listening to other individuals who may not, live in our community. So I think that right now is a very vital time for us to engage in healthier communications, or healthier dialogue, because that is one of the things that keeps barriers up, understanding each other and where we actually coming from as individuals.
Thanks. I see one other comment from Mar, and would you like to say that out loud, Mar? Would you like me to read that?
Sure. It's just something that you've been talking all along, but when you have the list of what are the things that define a country that needs help, this is the US. So it's pretty scary. We don't have to go all the way to Sudan. We don't have to go far. We have it here at home. And so that is discouraging, but it's also an opportunity, right? We have to work in so many levels. So
yeah, I think it's and I think the conversations that people are having now about the traditional methods of security are falling apart. And I think also we know that we're looking at the militaries, and we're looking at our traditional forms of winning battles, and kind of this win-lose mentality is breaking down, because we're seeing more people having to flee their homes. We're seeing more people losing everything and losing their family members. And so it is an incredible, time that we're in, where we have the opportunity to really create something new. And we have more peace builders and more people dedicated in thinking about nonviolence now than ever before. And we need to put some hope in that.
Great. We are just after 5 o'clock, and I know that you wanted to talk just a little bit more. We have students and community members and people from other places listening, and we also are going to have this available for them to watch if they weren't able to be here today. How can people become involved in this specific work of peace building as we close out this conference?
Well, I hope that one thing you take from this is that we all have a role in keeping our community safe, and that it's comes upon us to understand and learn tools and skills of how to de-escalate, how to interposition when we need to, how to be a protective presence to our neighbors and our family members and others that are at greater risk of violence. That's our job, is to learn that. We'd be happy to help you if you have your community or your church group wants some training. We'd be happy to provide that, so you can contact us. So we'd also invite you to we have a great intern program. We'd invite you to go to our website and poke around a little bit, listen to our Nonviolence Cafe series, consider donating if you have financial resources, consider donating time if you have time, and join us on social media, and just keep talking about this idea that we know that when we meet violence with more violence, it just escalates. When the presence of weapons escalates violence, and the only way to turn the heat down is to respond to violence with nonviolence. We know that in our personal relationships. I know when my husband's mad at me, and if I come back at him as hot as he has at me, we just escalate. But if I can come back, take a deep breath, and respond with compassion, with trying to understand his perspective, then we can calm it down, and we can actually have a conversation. That's what we're doing on a bigger level. That's what we need to do in our communities. And so encourage that idea. When you hear your neighbors, because there's an uprising and they're scared and they say, I think maybe I need a gun, say, well, what would you do with a gun? Who would you shoot? Why is that going to make you feel safer? I had those conversations with a few people last spring. They started talking, I think I need a gun to keep myself safe. And I said, who are you going to shoot? We default to force and threat of force when we need to default to nonviolence and to checking ourselves and seeing how to turn down the heat.
Great.
So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Marna, and thank you, Manu, and thank you, Paige. I'd like to point out that the reason that this particular panel probably happened at all is that our former student, Paige McLain, did work with you as a student, wrote a professional paper about it, brought it to my attention. And when we were planning this conference, I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to learn more about an organization that really is out there, physically out there, doing peace building work here and in many places around the world. And thank you so much for helping us bring together a lot of the themes that we talked about during the last 2 days.